Here we go. So today I had some requests, and we are recording this so people can use it after the fact. But I had a request to kind of go through the sale process from beginning to end, and we'll also kind of mention some of the stuff as far as office requirements and why, and just so we kind of get a good overview of the process. Nikki and I are this document that we're looking at. It will be in .loop. We are modifying a little bit to make some changes that are going to make it a better document than what it is now. But at least this is something we can talk about today and talk about the process and talk about some of the pitfalls that you might run into in the process of getting a deal from offer through closing. So let's start with the buyer side, because some of this is kind of related to the buyer side, I think, more than the seller side. But what's the first document you're ever going to have signed?
You and the client.
What agreement?
Agency disclosure.
Yes, the consumer relationship disclosure form, which I will change in this document to say consumer relationship disclosure form, because that's what it actually is.
It hasn't been agency since 2005.
Right. So when do you need to have that signed?
The first time you say
First time you meet somebody from the house.
First face-to-face.
I love that. Just talk about a specific.
What if you're meeting in a coffee shop to talk about the buying process? Yes or no?
Better.
What?
That's even better.
You still have to have a sign?
Oh.
Yeah. So the first face-to-face. What if someone walks in the office right now and asks about a property? Do you have to have them sign it? Yes. Before you even start talking about any properties.
Yeah, the way it's worded is the first personal meeting to discuss a specific property. So you can sit down and talk to them in generics a little bit for about buyer representation. But when you start to talk about a property or properties in general, you got to pull that form over and explain it. And not just say, here, sign this. Most of the agents out there will say, here, sign this. This means the buyer doesn't know what this signing. The consumer doesn't know what it means. So take the time to study it. Learn it so you can explain it properly.
Right. So with .loop, I think it's much easier if you set up a showing or a meeting with someone. Send it to them in .loop. That way they have a chance to read it through if they want to read it through, and you get that signature before you meet, and you don't have to worry about it. I think it's always, I think, an easier way to have that signed.
When you say that, are they going to sign it electronically?
Yeah, they can sign electronically. So you could say, hey, I look forward to showing you that property this afternoon. I'm going to send you a consumer relationship disclosure form that I have to have you sign. So I might as well get it out of the way now. I'll send it to you for e-signature.
Please review both sides of it. Any questions, call me if you understand it and you want representation. Those we should already have buyer checked off. Just sign it electronically.
That's another good indication. Having them sign that electronically, make sure that they can actually handle signing things electronically too. As opposed to getting to the point where they find a house that they like and they call you at 8 o'clock at night and say, oh, we want to make an offer, and now you're trying to help, and then they can't figure out how to use .loop. You're better off figuring that out up front than when they're ready to make an offer. So it's kind of getting them into the, hey, we're going to be e-signing some documents throughout the transaction. Let's see if you can handle the agency disclosure, the consumer relationship disclosure. So that's actually number one. And that's the case with sellers as well. When would you have to have a seller sign the consumer relationship disclosure form? You know how many agents probably don't have their seller sign the consumer relationship disclosure form upon a listing appointment?
None in our company.
Correct. Also. So everybody, that first listing appointment, you're having your seller sign the consumer relationship disclosure form?
I do. I actually use that. I use that form as a tool to build rapport and educate them on how we work as agents. And I basically start off with, I'm not sure if you've seen this form before, if you've had any other brokers through, but I'm going to take the time, and I'm going to take the time to explain it to you so you know how we work as agents, so you can be well informed about the process. I use that as a tool when I'm meeting buyers.
Honestly, and it sounds bad for our industry, but if you have a seller sign that, explain, this is part of, disclosure, and this is what every agent should be doing. And you being the only one that has presented that to them is probably pretty good.
And I point out that.
For some reason or other, agents look at that more as a critical document for buyers than they do for sellers, but it's no different. You still have to disclose who you're representing. Okay, all right, so that's the first form. Now if we're out there showing buyers' properties, obviously the next document you're going to work with is your, well, maybe not, there's one missing in there. What would be missing in between the consumer relationship disclosure form and the offer?
It's 2B. It says if designated agent, there's a consent and notice. But basically, if you do the buyers, and I recommend everybody strive, when they sign an agreement saying yes, when they sign an acknowledgement saying yes, I want you to be my buyer's agent, using the disclosure form, say real simply, okay, so this is the mandatory thing the state requires. This is the agreement that spells out how we work together. That's the agent, the buyer agreement.
Buyer representation.
So you go from the one that's the lawful thing you must do to this is the thing we now will do. So it basically explains, and I take the time, it explains how we both behave during the process. Because we have to do something, and actually they have to do something else. So if they don't want to do that form, and they do want to write an offer and an in-house listing, we have to use the designated agent form. Much easier to do the contract, because it's already got consent right in it.
Buyer representation agreement. How many of you are getting a buyer representation agreement signed with all your buyers? Dan, are you getting buyer representation agreements signed? Of course. I would never, there's a lot of agents out there that are willing to work without an agreement. I think it's a mistake. Work hard for our money. You don't want to risk your time and energy to have them just go to an open house and buy it with another agent. Now, at the end of the day, is that agreement something that you're going to go sue somebody over? Probably not. 12 years, we've never sued anybody for a buyer representation agreement. But to me, it's that document that when all of a sudden your buyer walks into an open house and that listing agent says, well, this property is going to go today. And if you haven't signed a representation agreement, then you might want to just make an offer with me because this is probably going to go. If you don't have something signed, they're just going to be like, yeah, we didn't really sign anything. We want this house. Versus saying, well, we did sign something. So that's really, in my mind, the difference. Is it's that agreement that they say, yeah, we are working with somebody. We are contracting somebody. Because a lot of agents at open houses will ask, oh, did you sign a buyer representation contract with the other agent? Or did you just sign the consumer relationship form? That's what they're going to ask. And if they say, no, I didn't sign the buyer representation, they're all over your clients. At that point, they're going to go after them with everything they can. So you're going to lose clients if you don't have them sign a buyer representation agreement. One of the things that a lot of agents are doing now, they used to put in the buyer representation agreement as offered in MLS for the compensation. More and more of our agents, especially the full-time agents that don't, feel that they're worth the 2.5%, if they're putting in 2.5%, and they're explaining to the buyer if the seller is offering less than 2.5%, we may have to make up the difference if we can't get it in a closer concession. Or they'll say, if we find a property in the first 12 properties or something like, without going and seeing 100 properties, and they're offering 2, I'll probably just waive you paying the difference. But at least it sets the tone up front. If you take me out to see 40 properties and they're offering 2, I'm going to want that extra 0.5%. A lot more of our agents are doing it, and the buyers are signing it because they want good representation, and we're worth it. We are worth it. Not agree?
Definitely.
So that's one of the things I'm seeing a lot of agents do with buyer representation agreements now. It's writing in that 2.5.
You see those buyer agents contracts, those are in .loop as well?
Yes. Yeah, we have in .loop, our .loop is set up with templates, and they're available to pull into any loop. We have the buyer form packet, seller form packet. We have additional forms for things that you won't normally run into, and you can just go into those and find all the documents.
The things that are in the one that says buyer form packet or seller form packet, those are the bare minimum you have to have.
Right.
The other ones are things that you might want to use or are optional.
Right.
But the ones that are in the packet, those are the things that have to be,
Yeah, so you have the buyer checklist, you have the disclosure forms, you have the buyer representation forms, and the other forms that we'll talk about in this check. All right, so we talked about consumer relationship disclosure form, we talked about getting a buyer agency form signed. The next one is the acknowledgement of inspections form. This is actually the same form in our .loop. We actually combine those two forms. So you'll see now this acknowledgement of inspections, attorney, and mold. If you're getting the buyer to sign other documents, sometimes we've had trouble with this not being signed and trying to get it after the fact on closings from agents within the company. Just have it signed up front. It's so much easier just get signed up front when you're either filling out the buyer representation agreement or at the time you're making the offer. And it's basically this form combined a couple different forms into one to make it easier on you guys. It used to be several different forms. So right now it's basically saying, you know, we understand as buyers that we have a right to legal counsel and we should get legal representation. The second part says we've received a consumer inspection consumer fact sheet, which is in the .loop folder as well. So you send and share with them the consumer.
the color.
It says facts about home inspection.
It's a four-page form, and there's
Yeah.
places for them to initial each of those pages.
They don't have to initial that if they sign this document.
I
So,
make them do that.
do you?
Yeah, I'm older than that.
So as long as you have proof that you shared it with them, that's enough. If you want to have them sign like Nadia does, you can. You guys have seen that, right? It's the other document that's in the loop. Yes, it looks like that. So share that with them and have them sign this. So they've received that. So they're saying we received that, which is a state law. And then there's also been recently a lot of interest and problems with mold, and that if they see mold, they should get someone to inspect it. We're recommending that they have someone that is experienced in mold to inspect the property. That's whether they do or not, that's up to them, but we're telling them that they should if they see it. At the bottom, they sign it, saying, okay, we acknowledge these things. If they're waiving inspections, waiving attorneys, et cetera, they would sign at the bottom, waiving.
Yeah.
They can waive attorney. I
No.
have a buyer that wants that you pay cash, wants to waive a lawyer.
Yeah, they can do that, but that bottom section only talks about the home inspection, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you first meet with them, the first section could be signed. The other section, I would wait until they're ready to make an offer and that form with you and say, or keep it on .loop and say, okay, if you're not going to do a home inspection, you need to sign the bottom section of that form.
We don't have an attorney waiver, but this is basically telling them we advise them to choose an attorney. So this in and of itself is enough to just have them sign this and say, okay, we understand we were told by Exit Road you should have an attorney. We don't have an attorney waiver form, which is fine, because we've told them, hey, you should have an attorney.
My buyer doesn't want to pay for a month.
Then
Are they using a bank?
No, it's cash.
Okay. Then if they got enough cash and they think they're savvy enough that they don't, then
It
they're
already
just real
happens.
estate.
I mean, the reality is somebody's got to close that out.
I said, and I want him to.
Somebody's got to accept the money. Some attorney's got to accept the money from the seller. I mean, even if he uses the seller's attorney, there's going to be costs to the buyer. Because the seller's attorney's not going to do it for free. He's going to say, okay, I'll accept your money. I'll handle the closing disclosure and show where all the money's going to go after this closing, but I'm going to get paid for it. So whether he's hiring someone himself or he's using the seller's attorney to do that, either way, he's going to have some costs involved in closing that property. I would advise get your own attorney to do it. It shouldn't be all that much cost.
Working on your behalf.
Yeah, I mean, what's it going to cost you? $400 or $500
No, he's finding price is like 1,000.
for an attorney?
Yeah, for closing for him to die.
Well, does that include title insurance? Because he wants title insurance.
I want to have that insurance, so I checked that box. I'm like, call somebody else, but you want me.
As a buyer, you want to have title insurance. And someone's got to do title review.
But if it costs 1,000, he's gonna forego the whole lawyer idea.
Wow, interesting. You run into all types, and this is why some of this documentation we have is to protect us. You know, there's a reason we have this form now. A couple of reasons. Almost all related to one deal. There was one for sale by owner deal. and our agent listed it, and the buyer came directly and that was inheriting a lot of money. And she made a full price offer. She didn't want to use an attorney. The seller didn't want to use an attorney. The buyer didn't want to do a home inspection, but they didn't have anything like this, waiving any of these things or saying we're not going to do any of these things. And then basically the daughter found out that her father's second wife, who was also the executor, said, "Wait a minute, you think you're getting all the money?" Even though the will said she's getting all the money, she contested it and then was going to hold up the money in court. So she didn't legitimately have the money yet. And our agent said, "Oh, great, you're inheriting the money." Didn't do anything to make sure that she actually had the money in the bank account. And then all of a sudden, what do you think happens after the whole thing goes up? Now everybody's got an attorney. And where is everybody pointing? Right to the real estate agent. Who agent? Didn't protect her. You guys were involved. And the seller didn't want to the buyer made a $30,000 deposit. The seller didn't want to give it back. They were fighting over it. Yeah. Things can go bad. This is why we have all this documentation. So, all right, so that form's pretty straightforward. Get your buyer to sign it. At worst case, right before you make an offer, or at the time of making an offer. So that kind of covers number 3 and 4. Those are actually one form now. Lead paint form. If you're making an offer, I always think that the best time to get that lead paint form signed is when you're making an offer, especially if the listing agent has put it in the paperclip on MLS. If you're the listing agent also, if your seller signed the lead paint, upload it to the paperclip so it's available for the buyer agent to download and sign at time of offer. It always gets forgotten. So even if you're in the listing agent side or in the buyer agent side, make an effort to get that signed at the same time you're getting the offer signed if you got an agreed offer. That's not a perfect world. It's not always going to happen, but if you work on it up front, it's not going to be an issue. We always have issues with last minute or if the closing's even gone by and all of a sudden we're reviewing documents for a closing and the lead paint is not fully signed. And it's a big no-no to go back to a buyer after a closing and say, hey, and you know why it's bad is because if you look at the actual lead paint form, let's go into the seller packet and just look at that quickly. If you look at the lead paint form and you see what it's basically saying, as part of it saying you have a right as a buyer to either waive your opportunity to test for lead, or you have 10 days to conduct a risk assessment. So if you're closed already and you go back to the buyer and say, hey, can you sign this saying that we gave you 10 days to do this or waive it, that in itself is probably finable, right? Yeah. So don't make that mistake. So the other mistake people make is, I see it coming from buyer agents all the time, is they'll have the buyer sign a blank lead paint form. That is a legal activity too. You are supposed to be signing this form, acknowledging what the seller is telling you about the lead paint. So the seller has to check these boxes above, and the seller has to sign it, and the agent has to sign it and initial from a listing agent perspective. So if you don't see the check boxes up top and the listing agent's signatures and the listing agent's signature and the seller's signature, don't sign it yet as a representing the buyer. And then
it's hugely important to get this form done as soon as possible and correctly, because we could be fined up to $10,000 if they take us to court for our own office. You're not getting paid unless it's done right. Right. This is the most important document out of all of them in our closing package. So get it.
A broker from Boston last summer trying to get me to have my buyer sign a blank one to send it to the seller. I'm like, no, that's not how it works.
No.
We have to acknowledge what the seller said.
If we ever need to step in and educate us as broker owners, we will. And we have on several occasions had to call and say, you guys aren't doing this right. So if you ever need our help with it, let us know. And even if you're having trouble getting the other agent to sign it, it's much easier to do that before the closing, because we'll threaten to hold back their commission check. Like, hey, we're not going to release any commission check until this thing is done. So don't wait till the last minute on it. Make sure the seller signs it first, and then your buyer's initialing, the appropriate, If there was documents provided, C. If not, you don't need to initial C. And then always have to do D, E, and F, and then check one or two below. And the buyers have to sign it. If there's two buyers, both buyers have to sign it. And it should have the address in it. Make sure the address is at the bottom of it. All right. That's lead paint. Next one on the list is copy of the earnest deposit with no account numbers. So with your offer forms, they typically still, which I don't even understand why they still need it. I wish our industry would move to make an offer, once it's signed, just get a deposit check. There's no need for really copies of checks to be running all over creation anymore. I mean, the reality is a copy of the check means nothing. The buyer never delivers it, or the agent never delivers it to a listing office. It's not a deal anyway. So what good does a copy of the check do? Really nothing. It just, the only thing it probably tells the seller is, okay, they wrote out a check.
I'm legit.
I'm
Yeah,
legit.
sometimes I never see checks. I tell the buyers, I says, write it out too and send me a copy. Sometimes I never even get it. They say, okay, offer's accepted. What should I do with it? I tell them, they'll do listing company.
Right.
I mean, the banks are the only ones who want to see a copy
Right.
of the check. We don't really care.
Especially with all the e-signatures now that we do, we as buyer's agents typically are not holding that buyer's deposit check in hand. So I don't know why we still do it. It's just still a common practice around here that when you make your offer, you send it in with a pre-approval and a copy of the check. I would black out the numbers on the check. It's good business practice to not have checking account numbers running around there.
Yeah, that's all I do is I just see the problem out, or I
Right.
check a copy, just hold it.
Right. Or tell your buyer, hey, just put a piece of paper over the account number. And send you a picture of it. So what happens? You get your offer accepted. What do you do with that deposit check?
Mail it to the listing office.
What if it's a really hot property?
Right.
Right. You drive it. If it was a multiple offer situation, or you have any inclination like this is,
No way anyone's cutting in front of me.
Right.
I get it.
right. You never want.
We don't touch it, we give it to you, right?
Well, not if you're the buyer agent. If
Yeah,
you're
right.
making an offer on someone else's property, then not.
Then the other agencies hold.
A fully binding offer is only a fully binding offer when there's something to bind it, meaning the money. So if you're a buyer agent and you're making offers and you get one accepted, my personal opinion is get that check in hand from your buyer, or tell your buyer where the listing office is, whatever is fastest, and make sure you get it to the listing office as fast as possible. Mail is snail mail. It could take up to a week to get to it. I think it's a little bit better practice to just deliver it.
And if it's somewhere local, and you've never met that agent, it's probably best to meet that agent and deliver it. Because there's nothing, back in the day, it was us old folks, we used to meet the listing agent and the buyer's agent at the property, shake hands, get to know each other. Before the buyers came, we build rapport. Today, we don't need any brokers. So it's really hard to work with somebody you've never worked with. If you meet them and say hi, they've got a face and a smile, they got I can work with this person. It just helps. You know, high touch. We're all high touch. We really forgot about high touch, so we need to be more for the agents. That's another good reason to meet somebody and deliver the check.
Right. I agree. And you don't actually, I think sometimes people underestimate what that may even do for the good of the deal. You know, let's say you never met an agent and now all of a sudden you come with a host of inspection issues. And that agent's never met you face to face, and they think, oh, God, this agent's a jerk. He's coming to me with all this stuff. But now if you reverse it and say you met, you handshook, smiled, you had good rapport, and now you come back with those inspection issues and say, oh, you know, I can't. It's a little bit different. You know what I mean? So don't underestimate relationships and what they can do for your clients and your business. All right, that's the deposit check. So the other thing with offers that I will mention is signatures. You've got to try to get signatures as fast as possible. Even if the reality is, and it's in this market, is until you have a fully signed offer, you don't really have anything. Even if the seller says, yeah, we're accepting your offer. It feels dirty and people hate it when it happens, but if you're in this business long enough, you're gonna either be on either side of seller accepts verbally accepts an offer, but then a better offer comes in, and guess what? You can accept that. Doesn't matter if they verbally accept it or not. The other thing I want to mention, and I'll post this on the board today because every once in a while, new agents come in and they don't have this on it. But I want to make sure that you guys have on your email signature this clause at the bottom that says, email sent or received shall neither constitute acceptance of conducting transactions via electronic means, nor shall it create a binding contract in the absence of a fully signed written contract. It's important to have that in your emails because what has happened in the past, and there was a court case that was won, is an agent emailed back a buyer agent and said, the seller has accepted your offer. And then they got a better offer and they said, sorry, the seller has accepted another offer. The agent and the buyer took that seller to court and won because they didn't have this clause in there, and the court decided, well, that's written. That was a written acceptance of the offer. The buyer, you have to
A
honor that.
reasonable person would have understood that to mean, yes, we are a go, and that's how they want it. Right. Because there was no bailout type of clause.
So be careful what you do in text too then, because text could be considered written too. So I would be, I would be very careful of saying even in text, the seller has accepted your offer. Just remember that those kind of things. Those can be considered anything in writing could be considered a binding contract. So, any questions on that? No. Okay. All right. So, pre-approval proof of funds. Obviously, if you're on the buying side, you want to have the pre-approval letter. You want to make sure it matches what they're getting for a loan. You don't want to submit an offer that's going to take extra time to be answered because you're making an offer, with a renovation loan and you have an FHA of pre-approval or vice versa. So make sure whatever you're offering matches, what your pre-approval letter is. And proof of funds. If you're making cash offers, you need to have proof of funds. What that could be considered, I would consider proof of funds a bank statement, even a 401k stock statement. Those can typically be pulled from. So that would probably constitute a proof of funds.
And again, with those, you can have the accounts.
Yeah, you should cross out the account numbers. Occasionally, you'll see. I just had one on a bank-owned property, and it wasn't sufficient. Buyers are making cash offers, but like with a bank letter saying like this person has availability of up to. Those can sometimes be scrutinized depending on the seller. Just understand that. But one other thing that I was going to say about the proof.
They send you pictures.
On the offer form, I know we're not going over the particulars of offer forms because we're just going through the process, but recently this came up, so I think I thought I'd mention it, is especially more down east, but a lot of buyers are making offers without mortgage contingencies. Does that necessarily mean that's a cash offer? This means the buyer is willing to risk their deposit money without having mortgage. Right. So if your buyer is confident enough that either I could pay for cash, or B, I'm so well financeable that I could get this loan with my eyes closed, then it may make sense to not have the mortgage contingency section filled out and waive that. You'd probably have to explain to the listing agent, we are getting mortgage, but we're waiving that, meaning the buyer is going to put this $10,000 at risk. But it can help in certain situations that you may need to. The other comment I want to make about offers is we have this addendum A, which has all this language in it.
Might be on the extra forms.
No. So in the buyer form packet, you'll see addendum A. And I know, Bill, you've never seen this before, but we have our form set up so that we have language in there that you would typically use on an offer. So all this stuff is in here. The items that you're not going to use on this addendum, delete out when you put it in a loop. It looks, I saw an agent crossing them out the other day, striking them. I would just delete them out. It looks cleaner when you delete them out. So if you're not asking for a closing cost credit, then take it out of there. The Title V language, if there's no Title V going on, take the Title V language out of there. The appraisal language, I would typically leave that in there. You want to make sure it appraises.
Didn't we have some other forms called Addendum A? That was like a bunch of,
Yeah, this is it.
no, it was like a,
Oh, there's a,
Years ago, there was.
It was like a rider or something.
yeah, there's one from the board that we have that's in the extra forms. It's, I don't know, I think it's all kind of covered in your inspection contingency anyway.
Okay.
So,
The legal one might be like a 48-hour first right of refusal type of thing. That's gonna have some stronger legal language in it.
the one I see use it a lot lately, and I just want to mention one thing about, is the escalation clauses. So this buyer shall offer $1,000 more than the next highest offer up to a maximum price of. Proof of the next highest offer must be provided to the buyer prior to execution of the final offer. The only thing you've got to be careful of on this is if you're asking for closing cost credits, what does that escalation clause mean? We had an agent use an escalation clause, but they lost the deal because let's say they asked for $5,000 in closing cost credits, and then their escalation clause was up to $220,000, $1,000 over the next highest offer up to $220,000. And let's say that next highest offer was $210,000, so that would mean they'd offer $211,000, but they're still getting $5,000 in closing cost credits back. So actually, their net offer is still lower than the next highest offer if that next highest offer was not asking for closing costs. Does that make sense?
Right.
So you should make it
$1,000 more than the next
net next highest net offer. Net offer, not including inclusive of closing costs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So be careful of that, because they actually lost one. That, yeah, your offer was the next highest offer. Actually, it wasn't our buyer agent that lost it. It was one of our listing agents who that's how it happened. And the escalation clause didn't get it because the net offer was less. So make sure your language is understandable that the buyer understands what that means. So if you wanted to make it up to 220, you would make it up to 220,000, but you'd add in there next highest net offer, inclusive of closing costs, up to 220,000. You know what I mean?
And even though we put that in there to protect our clients or help our clients, the part at the end where it says that they must provide us with an executed offer, they might just say, yeah, we're not going to show you a copy of that. You're just going to have to take our word. So it depends on who you're working with on the other side. Some people may just ignore that altogether and say, yeah, we've had other offers. We've actually had offers that were more than yours, but we want to negotiate yours at this price. So that might be a case where the listing agent knows they got a higher offer, but the net offer isn't better. So you can say without lying, we've got an offer that's higher than yours, but we're going to try to negotiate with you. Please ask your buyers if they would buy at this price.
Yeah, a year or so ago, we only added this in probably a year or so ago because at that time you weren't seeing a lot of these. And my opinion was, if I ever saw that offer, I would just say, the highest maximum price was $220. I would have said to my seller, let's just counter him at $220. Say, my seller just wants to counter you at $220. If you want it, it's yours at $220. They're obviously willing to go up to $220. I don't have any other offers. I don't need to. You just showed me your hand that you're willing to pay $220. Now maybe they come back and say, well, if you're not going to show me other offers, maybe it's $215. Okay, still higher than my list price.
And so some people, some buyers agent, and it kills me. Some buyers agents actually will coach and counsel their buyers to go crazy on the offer price, and then at the home inspection we're going to beat them up. I've noticed this happening, and I don't like it at all. I think the home inspection clause gives the buyer client the right to back out of the deal. It doesn't give them the right to negotiate. And I've done twice on the same property. One tried to negotiate down to 15 grand, and oh, by the way, leave the furniture too. It says, for what? New things to, I said, no, there's nothing new. I pointed out these issues when we did a showing, because it was important I had to show. And another one, we negotiated down substantially. But all these things, they found a couple other things, and now they want just another 2 grand off.
Right.
My clients are probably going to say, yeah.
When you're working with buyers, unfortunately with the e-signature era, it's taken away a lot of communication. But, so if your buyer is making their first offers, even if you are doing e-signature, get them on the phone and talk about the process with them. And say, okay, we're making an offer. How much do you want to offer? Walk through all the details with them, and then just how the thing's going to go about. Say, okay, if we get our offer accepted, we're going to have 10 days to do our home inspection. And prep them for what the home inspection means. Home inspection is going to be our opportunity to make sure there's nothing hidden that we didn't notice when we were walking through the property that could have an effect on the value or your usability or unforeseen major costs. It's not to nitpick on minor maintenance issues or things that you normally have to do when you do own a home. And remember, we talked about the roof is going to be nearing its end of life, so we can't really come back on the roof or this or that or the other. To set that tone up front is important, because too many times your buyers just think, okay, yeah, it's a separate negotiation part, or they see a bunch of little things like switch plate cracked, some peeling paint here, just little stupid things that I don't care how many, even all of us as homeowners, if a home inspector went through our houses, they're going to have a field day and they're going to have the same results. And then you're going to look at it like, wow, I'm not really doing all these little maintenance things in my house I should be. So you just have to set that tone up front so that your buyer knows this is not another opportunity to negotiate.
If we find out that the house is full of termites, you can't see that during the initial second showing. It's in the wood. If that happens, we'll negotiate. All right. If something shows up like on the well test turns up bad or the radon's high, nobody knows about those things unless they've already tested for them.
Right.
If something shows up then we'll do the best we can.
Exactly. All right. So now you've got an acceptance. Make sure it's in writing. Make sure it's signed.
And delivered to all parties.
Right. I would actually also make sure, look under public records in MLS or go to Mass Land Records and look at the property and make sure whoever's on the deed as the deeded owners, sellers, that they've all signed the offer. We've had situations before where we get 2 or 3 weeks into a deal and find out there was 2 owners, a husband and a wife, who are getting divorced, and only the husband listed it and had it signed, but the wife needs to sign it. All of a sudden, she's got an issue with it. Well, I didn't want to sell this house. We're gonna have to go through court. You're gonna have to talk to my attorney. So make sure whoever's on the deed has signed the offer. So make sure it's fully signed. Make sure the deposit check is delivered to the listing office. Notify the buyer to schedule inspections. We have a list of home inspectors. They can Google home inspectors. They need to schedule one ASAP as soon as the offer is fully accepted and you have both signatures. Notify the buyer to make sure that they complete a full mortgage application. A lot of times, the buyer has not completed a full mortgage application. They have a pre-approval, which is based on some phone conversations and maybe a credit check and maybe checking one pay stub or something like that, but it's typically not a full application. So make sure they say you got to call your lender the next day, and if you want to get any other price, if you want to go to another lender too to get a check price, now's the time to do it. You got a couple days to do this. And make sure they get in a full application, which is typically filling out a full form and signing it and submitting it to their lender. They may be able to e-sign it, I don't know, but it's a full application that typically they haven't done at that point.
And that's good that you mentioned that when you send them the offer, if you send it electronically, you should follow up with a phone call, because there's time frames that there's so many things the buyers are supposed to do within a certain time frame that they screw up. They might put their deposit at risk. So explain that they should immediately after you hang up, call the bank and get that process started. Call and try to get a home inspector because they're kind of busy still.
Yeah.
So those are the first 2 things they should do automatically. Get your home inspector going and get your lender working on it. So once they get those 2 things going right away, then you can work with them on making sure they pick an attorney, or if they're gonna use the bank's attorney. You can work on those as you go.
So on our offer form, you fill in whether you want 10, I think it's automatically said there's 10 days. Sometimes if you're pushing a deal, you can put 7, although it's tough for home inspectors to do it that fast. Do you know when you have to respond to the seller on our offer form if you have a 10-day window in there? When do you have to respond to the seller with your inspection results or any buyer requests? Do you know? So our offer form, if you put 10 days in there, if you read it, it says you have to respond within 24 hours of that 10th day with how the buyer wants to proceed, whether they want to back out, move forward, ask for things, etc. So,
And if you don't, or the buyers don't, the deposit is at risk.
right. So that's an important thing to remember. You got to keep track of that date, because if your buyer does want to ask for things, even if they're requesting more time for some reason, you got to do it. I mean, most of the time it's done via email, and nowadays there's not a form for that. There is a form in the extra form pack that says an extension for inspections, which I would use if they're extending. But if they're just responding like, hey, my buyer's asking for these things to be addressed that came up on the home inspection, or asking for money off, or whatever it may be, or even just, hey, we're moving forward, you should document that in an email to the listing agent, just, before that.
It used to be like 24 to 48, but you're saying on your form. it's
Our
like
form,
24?
it's,
It's the Boston farm, the Worcester farm always said, you should do the Worcester farm read out the way we were grown up on, is do it within a certain amount of time, and then within 24 hours or 48 hours after inspection. So if you did the inspection day 1, you got 2 days to do it. If you did it on the 10th day, you still had 2 days. This farm is different. It gives, if they did it on day 1, they still have until the 11th day. So it's the Boston
which is
farm,
a better protection for our clients, because it gives them time to let it sink in, talk to a contractor if they need to. It just gives them a little bit more time to respond to what did come up. And hopefully, if you got 10 days, hopefully you got the radon back by then too.
Oh, and if you're,
Although that's not always, if you did a radon on the 7th day of the inspection and you got 10 days in there, you're probably not going to get the results back. You may have to, in your email, say this is still pending radon results, which will be back within.
if the radon or the well test go beyond the time frame and you do an extension, don't do a blanket extension on a home inspection. Try to narrow it down to, we already worked out the issues with the house, the mechanical, but we're extending the buyer's rights to, still back out, provided the radon and well test come back okay.
Yeah,
One other thing.
correct. There's occasions when those things, because you're pushing a purchase and sales agreement, they will need to become part of the purchase and sales agreement. So if you've got, your inspection was fine, everything's moving forward fine, except for you're waiting on a well test, or you're waiting on a radon result, but everybody wants to sign a purchase and sales agreement, you can add into the purchase and sales agreement subject to satisfactory results of the radon testing. So if it's going to go into beyond the inspection period because you're waiting for that to come back and everybody needs to sign a P&S because of your P&S dates, then you could make sure that the attorneys add in there subject to passing results, satisfactory results of the radon test or the water well test. So that stuff could end up in your purchase and sales agreement.
Stress to the buyers that they should get all this stuff done faster rather than dragging their feet. Because if that's something that goes into the purchase and sales agreement, some appraisers may read that and say, yeah, we're not going forward until we get these results. If it's in a P&S, they have a responsibility to check in. If it's not in a P&S and we've already negotiated it, no problem. That's why we do certain things in a timely fashion. Apply for mortgage within 2 days. Do your home inspection within 10. P&S after that. But we don't want the lawyers racking up their hourly rate for our clients until we've already know we've knocked off a couple of these potential deal breakers.
Plus, it's an opportunity if you got P&S signed and you've already hashed out whatever the seller's going to do after the inspection. Let's say there are repairs that the buyer's asking for, and the seller's agreeing to do them. Those things becoming part of the P&S is always the best case scenario, because then you've got full acceptance from the seller. Yeah, we're going to do this before closing. This form in the extra, this is in the buyer additional form set. There's extension of contingencies. This is the form you'd use if you need to extend a contingency. And you just basically, in this case, you're going to extend the inspection of, and you would put right on and well, and then put a date in there. So that's one of the things. If you needed to extend the PNS, you could do it too. One of the things I'm noticing with the PNS, and you know, honestly, it's if you really want to do your job to the T, I would take responsibility for this, as most attorneys now are not taking the PNS dates seriously. They basically say, yeah, we're working on the PNS, and you're beyond the PNS date on the offer, and they don't seem to care. Personally, if I was really trying to protect my client and my deal, I would be requesting an extension signed by both the buyer and seller for signing the PNS if the attorneys are not getting their shit together and getting it done. For some reason or other, in the last couple of years, it's just been a kind of a lackadaisical approach to the PNS by most attorneys, and that, you know, you can sometimes see them out like 7 days beyond when they're supposed to be, just because the attorneys are still fooling around.
They backed off because of that case law that proved that the offer to purchase is a legal binding document.
So do you
the
think
PNS
we should be?
I think we should still do it just for protecting it. I mean, the more we do to protect our clients in writing, the better it protects them. I mean, chances are it'll still go okay. If the attorneys are dragging their feet, it should still be okay, or if they didn't do their job, they might be held more liable than us. One of the problems with attorneys and electronics sending us PNSs, if they send it to me, now I have an obligation to review it. If I never see a PNS because the attorneys are working at it, I'm not liable for stuff I don't see.
Right.
But if they send me a copy of it, oh, just as a matter of fact, Bill, here's a copy of it attached here too. I'm just a CC on a list. Seller's attorney sends it to buyer's attorney, but they have me CC'd. I'm responsible for that now that I see it. Even if I don't open it, I'm responsible because at some point I should have seen it.
Right.
So when I get a copy of a PNS and I don't want to see it or read the 15 pages because the offer's two, I'll read it and scan it, make sure that there's nothing weird in it. Because attorneys can screw up.
Yeah, make sure the major points, like the seller
Or
cost
window, I
credits
should
are in
say.
there, repairs are in there. Make sure certain things that you had as part of the offer or the negotiations for the home inspections end up in the PNS, because sometimes they don't, or they get missed or whatever. The other part of the PNS is, in our area, typically the seller's attorney starts the PNS, buyer's attorney reviews it, they hash out the details, and then at some point it's ready to be signed. You should coordinate and help make sure everybody understands how it's going to be signed. There's sometimes where it's going to be electronic signature. Sometimes it's just, them sending the listing agent or the buyer, here's the finalized PNS, and you're going to have to coordinate getting it signed by the buyer and then delivering it to a listing agent or doing it electronically. So there is no uniform, like, oh, this is how it always happens in this area as far as who's going to coordinate getting this thing signed.
I've got attorneys who take care of it and don't bother me. I've got attorneys that don't bother me, but they say, hey, can you get the buyer's or seller's signature? I'm selling a house in Winchton. The sellers live in Iowa. The attorney who referred me to the deal doesn't have that loop. He says, Matty, can you? Yeah, no problem. There you go, Lisa. And I send her an email, say, hey, Lisa, I just sent you the PNS. I already spoke with Nick. It's all set. Please review it. Any questions, get back to either me or Nick. Boom, done.
Right. In other areas, like if you get doing deals up in Leominster, they're not using the attorneys to do the purchase and sales agreement. The listing agent's doing the PNS. So this is not uniform across the state. But just know that too.
Come to Massachusetts.
Leominster, Fitchburg area, it's going to be the listing agent starts the PNS. Honestly, at the end of the day, I wish someday even this area would move to using a standard PNS. We do have a standard 6-page PNS, which is just a long form offer. At the end of the day, it would probably deals would go smoother if we just went to that.
If you didn't use lawyers,
Yeah, for the PNS.
Because each lawyer has their own addendum.
They don't even. I'm not even sure they even read the PNS. So a seller, like in this area, basically, a seller's attorney has their PNS. That's a standard, and then the buyer gets it. And I don't even think they even review it. And they say, well, here's our standard buyer addendum to it. It basically says the same thing that the offer is, but because neither one wants to actually read it. And then they go, somehow they agree, and then they're like, okay, here's the PNS, and here's the rider, and everybody signed like 15 pages of documents that
Don't mean anything. And the writer says, should there be a discrepancy between the first 5 pages and the last 5 pages, the last 5 pages shall prevail.
right? So it's just the way
My
things get
addendum
done.
is the best.
So the other thing that Matteo mentioned was, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but in our offer on page 2, it references the addendum, which you guys are going to use, but also says subject to execution of a mutually agreed upon purchase and sales agreement. We have that in there because, as Matteo mentioned, there was a case that went before the court that said the buyer wanted to back out at the P&S, and basically said, well, we want to back out. We're not agreeing to sign a P&S. And the seller took them to court, and the court said, actually, this offer form, if there's no other document, will be considered the contract to purchase. And they basically won that case and said, okay, your offer form is the contract.
So we just got to keep the deposit.
No, but actually, the case happened, there was a condo somebody was selling, they sold it for maybe 2 1/4. And then somebody came around later on and said, hey, there's no P&S. We buy your place for $250. The seller said, shit, yeah, $250 is way better than $225. The numbers may not be right. But they basically said, screw you, number one. They went with number 2. And then that's the big law case that said, no, you had a legal binding document with number 1. Sell it to them. So it cost a lot of money for that case. That's how the law went.
And the seller's lost.
The sellers lost. So they had to accept the first offer.
So they went to number 2, that's what.
Right. So basically, so this makes sure that this says that, okay, this isn't going to be the binding contract. We need to sign a P&S. So it could, in that case, it screwed the seller. And in other cases, it could screw the buyer. So we added this in there to make sure that it's subject to signing.
It holds everybody together.
It holds everybody together, exactly. All right. So now where are we? We sent the offer docs. Notify the buyer of the mortgage application. Send offer docs to the lawyers. So you got to make sure the lawyers have the offer document so that they can prep the P&S.
Okay.
So make sure you have contact info for both lawyers. If the property has a septic system, get a copy of the Title V. Hopefully, the seller's already done a Title V. If they haven't, then they need to get that done ASAP.
And the language in the addendum A spells out that the seller shall provide passing Title V. So make sure if you're writing an offer, that's in there.
Exactly.
Not to do a Title V inspection. Yeah, we did a Title V inspection. It failed. Shit's bubbling up going on, but you still got to buy it because you didn't put subject to passing. So be very careful.
The language we have in addendum A is written to make sure it's clear. There also was almost a big issue with our office that actually went to beyond the local court, went to the Supreme Court before it was overruled. But basically, the offer just said subject to seller providing Title V. It didn't say like passing Title V certification. It was just very vague language. Let's put it that way. Seller accepted it. Seller did the test. It failed, and the buyer had some sharp attorney relative from Boston. Their actual real estate attorney was like, "Yeah, it didn't pass. We're just going to have to move on." Seller, there's no way seller's going to, give you a $30,000 septic system on a $90,000 property. They had a relative in Boston that reviewed the offer and said, no, we can go after the seller in this. And basically, language to me, I'm believing the language to believe that the seller has to provide you with a passing Title V. And so it went through local court. Local court said, yeah, no, we agree with the buyer. And the seller took it to appealed it to Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, come on. In some reality of this life, we have to look at things and say, is that reasonable? And no, it's not. It should not have been reasonably assumed that the seller is going to.
He must have been embarrassed after all that.
And it cost each side like $10,000 in attorney fees. So Title V language needs to be very, very clear what it means. Condo docs. If it's a condo if it's a condo, you got to make sure you get the docs and financials. This can be a real issue with some condos, only because the listing agents don't always do their due diligence up front to get the seller to get that stuff right away. Typically because to get a whole condo doc package from a condo association, it's big and it costs money. And sometimes the sellers are like, I don't want to get that until we have a real buyer. and then you get the deal under agreement, and you request it, and it takes the condo association 2 weeks to get you the documentation. And here's what,
Questions and
yeah,
issues.
so really work that up front. Even before you're making an offer, see if the agent has the condo docs. If they don't, then I would we have one of the agents going through this right now, and the buyer wants to review the condo docs and the rules and regulations before they make an offer, and the listing agent saying, no, after the offer acceptance, you'll get those, probably because they haven't requested them yet. So if that's the case, I would make your offer contingent on review of the condo docs and rules and regulations, if your buyer is even still willing to make an offer.
Blows me away that most of that stuff should be set,
Should get that up front.
online.
Right.
The master deed is online. I mean, the
Oh,
rules
some
and
of it is.
regulations, some are recorded at the registry, some aren't.
Listing agents should be getting that stuff up front and even making it available via the paper. Like, the more you can provide up front, the less headaches you're gonna have down the line. Why put yourself under, like, even as a listing agent, why put yourself under the pressure of getting a deal under agreement that's gonna close in 30 days, and then having to deal with the stress of trying to figure out how to get these documentations out? So just get it up front.
In some places, where the managers stay upon, Phoenix Management, they're hard to get in touch with. If you want anything, they'll get it to you, but you're gonna pay.
And it has to be requested from by
Yeah.
the owner of the
Now, they won't
condo.
give it to you,
Yeah.
only the condo owner.
Right. All inspections are complete. Any changes to the inspections are sent to the attorneys to make sure it goes to the PNS. Typically, the PNS, the buyer signs first, the check, and the signature, signed copy of the PNS, and then delivered to the listing agent, or somehow getting to the seller or the seller's attorney. That's if it's going to be hand signed. If it's going to be e-signed, everybody signs it, and typically the buyer, and you may have to coordinate this. How do I get this PNS check to the listing office? I don't know why. I think as a rule, make sure everybody understands, especially if you're on the listing side, even if you're on the buyer side, have the buyer get a bank check for the second deposit. We don't accept regular checks for PNS deposits, and other offices are moving more and more in that direction. And the reason is it can take up to 21 days for a bounce check to show up in our account. So if you've got a 30-day deal and you're getting a PNS check on the 15th or 16th day, it's just not enough time to clear our account.
So I have stressful check, just got this over the weekend. This is the second one, this isn't any good.
Is it your company?
$1,000?
It is, I'm the listing agent.
$1,000?
Mm-hmm.
When to close it?
13th of November,
Probably okay with that. Anything over 1,000, we're not.
but from here on out, we want the second check to be
Yeah.
in order.
For a bank manager.
Okay.
Surprisingly
Surprisingly
enough, some people buying houses are still bouncing checks. I don't know how they think they're going to buy a house and bounce a check, but we have, on average, 1 to 2 a month that gets bounced. A lot of times, it's the buyer's made an offer, and they do an inspection, and they want it back out, and instead of going through the release process, they just run to the bank and you pull the money out of the bank.
Some of the younger buyers, they don't have a real checking account. They have a couple checks. And so they write a check and they say, oh, I'll move it from that account to another, and they may forget. And if somebody's writing an offer to purchase a home, not a car, I always have on my offer from $1,000. If they want to do 500, like the dealer just died, they were doing 500 up front and 500 with the PNS. That deal died, they say, in the home inspection. But I don't think these people should have been buying a house. That's my honest guess. When it officially closes, I'm going to check with that buyer's agent to find out, how did they really walk away? Right.
I had a guy recently, like, we put $1,000 down, and he wanted the full 5% of the second deposit. It was like a $9,000 check. And my clients were putting down like $20,000 anyway, so they were like, that doesn't matter to us. I said, yeah, but it's kind of a lot of money.
Yeah, that's old school. That's the way we was taught, right? You got to do it. If it's not 3.5 FHA or 5%, then the deal ain't real. No, you can give me 1,000 today, give me 4,000 at PNS, and then the rest you bring to closing.
Right.
I don't care what the numbers are. I like them.
I mean,
to
at
be
the end of the day, you got to think
legitimate.
of it like this. From a buyer's representation standpoint, you want to have the buyer put as minimum down as you can at risk. And as the seller's side, you want them to put as much money as down as risk. So it's a negotiation just like anything else. It's what am I comfortable as a buyer and what am I comfortable as a seller taking from you to feel like you're just not going to walk away from the deal. Like, honestly, if it sounds like a lot of money, but let's say your buyer was only making $1,000 now, and $1,000 with P&S, $2,000. And all of a sudden, the perfect property comes on the market, $20,000 less than what you have on the agreement. Do you think you're going to walk away from another deal?
You're gonna
I
skip.
would probably do. I'll take if I'm going to make $20,000 buying another house and write off $2,000, hell yeah, I'm out of that deal. So that's why sellers want a sizable deposit. They want an amount of money that they don't think that your buyer is going to just walk away from.
In today's market, if you're representing a buyer, it may make more sense to put as much money down as possible to make your offer look strong.
Even from an offer standpoint, I'm seeing more and more than $1,000.
I see a lot of $2,000 with the upfront offer.
Because actually, one of our agent buyers might walk from $1,000 deposit, or be willing to risk $1,000 because they want to make an offer on another property. So, you know what I mean? Okay, all right, let's move on, so we can get through the rest of this. All right, so make sure you get a fully signed copy of the P&S. It's always good to keep your dot loop up as you go instead of wait till the last minute. Make sure you got your offer in there, your lead paint in there, your inspection form in there, all signed, and your P&S in there signed. Then you're really almost done with your turnover package.
I have a question. I have been keeping up with everything the Lynn Disclosure
Yep.
Agency. I looked at it today. It's not in there. Does Christina move it someplace more? It's gone.
All right, we'll look at that afterwards, but it shouldn't.
Is there one or two loops?
Well, every time I
Well, we'll look at that afterwards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I'm going to ask you. I
Okay.
can't find it.
All right. Next, the appraisal. Make sure the appraisal is getting ordered. Sometimes they'll call the buyer agent. Sometimes they'll call the listing agent, depending on who the lender gives the contact information for. Just make sure that that's happening. That's going to happen at some point. It's not a bad idea to even meet the appraiser there, whether it's you or the listing agent, just to kind of, if you're the listing agent and you're pushing the sale price that, you're like, I can't believe we got this price for the house, I would recommend you as the listing agent to show up at the appraisal. And it doesn't mean you want to show up and tell the appraiser how to do his job and say, you better, make this come out. But when you meet the appraiser, I always think it's a good idea to just say, oh yeah, well, this is nice house, and you'd be able to say, like, yeah, it was crazy. We had like 8 offers, this thing went nuts. You know what I mean? Because that put the bug in his ear that you should find a way to make it
They
valuable.
usually ask me anyway, they usually ask, what did the house,
Right.
what did it sell
I
for?
brought it because of this checklist.
Right. So it's a good idea. You never know. It's just a good idea to meet them there, I think.
Like, don't meet them and hand them
The
the
comp.
comps, like, here,
Right, but just put that
But
kind
that's
of,
with you.
like,
If they
yeah,
ask,
this
sure.
market's hot, this price range is hot, we had like 8 offers, half of them over asking. It's gonna put their bug in their ear that, there wasn't some lone stupid buyer that came here and was wanting to pay a stupid price.
Right.
The whole market was saying that it's worth this price.
Always ask the question when they call for the appointment, say, is there anything I can bring to you?
That's a good idea.
Always ask.
Well, I did bring
And if they
it
say, oh, I don't know, what do you mean? Well, can I bring you a couple comps? If they say, yeah, sure, not a problem, bring them. If they say, no, I'm all set, maybe have them with you, but don't push them on them, because if you push them on them, they might become adversarial. Always think helpful. Let me help you come to the right time.
Right. Like if your seller did a bunch of things like a new furnace, new roof, and you have like a list of recent upgrades list, like, as a listing agent, if your seller's done a bunch of work to the house, I always think one of the things you should upload as an additional document on the paperclip is a list of recent upgrades. You could hand that to a appraiser and say, hey, didn't know if you wanted this or not. And always say, didn't know if you wanted this or not. Here's a list of what, the seller's recently done to the property. It might help them with his appraisal. So. All right. Okay, now we're beyond the appraisal. Always check with the lender, like, following the appraisal for like the next week, say, hey, did the appraisal come in? Did the appraisal come in? Did it come in good?
Who do you call for that?
You want to check with the buyer's lender. If you're the listing side, you want to check with the buyer's agent to say, hey, have
The
you
guy
checked?
said before he left me that it was thumbs up. We're all good. That's this little checkup.
No,
Yeah.
yes.
Huh?
What?
If the appraiser gives you a thumbs up,
Yeah.
they're not supposed to do that.
Oh,
But
he
if they
did.
do that, then you're good to go.
Yeah, you should.
I wouldn't check in. not supposed to say we're all set.
Yeah.
But you might want to check in and say, is there any conditions, that we have to paint,
Right,
put a railing someplace or paint something.
right.
Sometimes you just throw some
Right.
something that you.
Well, also typically, I don't see them releasing the appraisal lately until the PNS is signed. That's been kind of a newer thing that I'm seeing, is they're not releasing the appraisal. They used to release appraisals before the PNS. Lately,
They won't release it until it's signed and the date on the front page is completed. A lot of people sign it with, I said, listen, it's not Loop, it's signed on a date.
Right.
Says, yeah, but there's no date up on a, this blank date of October 2017.
Right.
They don't put a number in, they won't accept it.
So, I mean, once the appraisal has gone to the property, that, even if you haven't heard, I would start from that point, probably like 5 days after that. That would be your period to start, whether you're on the buying side or listing side, to be checking in, saying, how do we look on appraisal and loan commitment? Because at that point, they should be getting close to loan commitment and want to see what's going on with the deal. Are they getting their loan commitment? Is it conditional loan commitment? Ask to see a copy of the loan commitment letter. Even if you're on the listing side, you want to see what is it that is conditional on. There's all of a sudden there's a million conditions, like the buyer's got to pay off this lien and that lien, and then you should be kind of sweating whether the deal's going to close or not.
When do we have that?
After the appraisal, within a few days after the appraisal, you can start that question, like, hey, did the appraisal come in? How are we looking on loan commitment?
And that's getting a copy.
Yeah, if they have a loan commitment, get a copy of it. So
So if this was Monday.
say my seller would like to see a copy of the loan commitment, because you have a mortgage contingency that protects that buyer up to a certain date to get a loan commitment.
Okay.
If you need an extension on that you would want to file an extension for.
I always just tell them when they ask, like if my sellers are like, well, how did we do on appraisal? I just say, no news is good news. The only time they're going to let us know anything is if there's a problem.
Right, and if you're on the seller side, you should be less concerned with, like, obviously if you're on the selling side and the buyer's loan commitment date goes by and they haven't asked for an extension, don't bring it up, because now they've just lost their contingency. But if you're on the buyer side and you're coming up on that contingency date, take responsibility for saying, do we have a loan commitment? If not, then we need to request an extension on that loan commitment to stay in contract and protect the buyer's deposit. So want to be more cognizant of the buyer side. On the seller side, if that goes by, then that's, at that point you could argue that, hey, seller should keep the deposit money.
Seems like buyers agents used to be, hey, we got commitment, we're good to go. Now it's like you gotta ask them for it.
I know.
Used to be able to,
Honestly,
they would tell you. Now you gotta ask them.
honestly, I feel there's been a movement to laziness in our industry.
It has. And the commitment letter today doesn't mean anything anyway. Years ago, you got a commitment, that loan was good to go. Today, a commitment letter has 4 or 5 different things, like, provided these things happen,
Well, you
we'll
want
give
to
you the
see
money.
that. You still want to be able to see that.
Yeah.
Listing agent.
But-
Okay, what are we up against?
The only commitment letter, or the only commitment, true commitment, is when you have a clear to close.
And that's-
Commitment letters back in the day meant something. Today, the banks always have a
And
backup clause left in there.
And one thing you might see with these commitment dates is a good buyer's attorney is going to keep requesting extensions on the commitment date until they have a clear to close.
Yes.
Because most of these commitment letters do have contingencies. They have conditions like credit check approval 5 days before closing.
Verification.
And
Work.
verification up until 5 days of closing. So he's right. The commitment letters are still conditional. They're not clear commitment letters. The only thing that's really a clear commitment is when you hear the words clear close. So some buyer's attorneys are requesting to extend the mortgage commitment date up until that clear close date. I would argue from the seller side, no. The buyer's got to take some risk at some point here that they're going to still be okay between now and the closing 7 days from now. So,
When the seller sees that, they're getting panicked. Oh my God, they don't have any financing. They want another extension.
Right.
What's all these extensions?
Right.
They get panicked.
Right. So you may get in the middle of attorneys arguing whether or not to extend the mortgage commitment date more time to basically up until the clear close date.
Until they sign a CD.
Right. And I've had it happen on my bank loans recently, and the seller, my bank, is saying no. Like, you've got a commitment that's only conditional on a final credit check, like one other thing, and your buyer wants to buy this property, they got to be at risk now. You've gone far enough. You've got limited risk. These are the only two things that are at risk. If your buyer's not willing to move forward without it, then they can go find another property. And typically the buyer's like, okay, we'll take the risk. At the end of the day, what would happen if the buyer wanted to back out and they wanted to get their money back and the seller didn't agree? What would happen with the deposits?
Typically, because lawyers don't have any guts to go after each other, is they split it. $1,000 or $5,000.
If you couldn't come to an
$250
agreement.
to buy, $250 to sell
The
it.
thing you need to know about any escrow is it can't be released until both parties agree to how it's going to be released. So even if we're holding deposit money, just because one party might just walk away from the deal, like let's say buyer just walks away, not because of mortgage commitment, not because of inspection, just decides, I'm walking away, I want my money back. And the seller says, no, they walked away, we want the money back. We can't just say, you know what, the buyer did just walk away, we're going to give the money to the seller. We can't be judge and jury. So, you know, as clear as it may be, so that one party was at fault, we can't release money. We basically have to hold it in escrow and say, until you guys can decide how to split it or who's getting it and both sign off on that, money stays in our escrow account.
Do we have that paperwork or is that?
The escrow release form can be signed any way. It could be seller receives, buyer receives, it could say split of the money. As long as if both parties sign, then we will release based on that escrow release form. Otherwise, it sits in our escrow account, and if one party wants to sue the other, and the court orders us how to release the money, then we release the money based on the court order. If we don't, that money could legitimately sit in our escrow account forever.
Unless we want to file an interpleader suit, meaning we're neither the defendant nor the complainant. We have money, Your Honor, and we got two parties that are fighting over it. Please advise us. The judge would probably say, send it to us, we'll work it out.
Right.
So,
But
as long as it's a court order.
we would never do that. So literally, we've got escrows. They're typically not much, like $500 or $1,000 escrows that have been sitting in our escrow account for years and years and years. The seller said, well, I'm certainly not giving the money back to you. I'd rather see it sit in escrow account forever than for you to get the money. So just know that. Like, it's not, the buyers sometimes think, oh, I'll just back out and get my money back. And even if the buyer feels like they're doing it for a very just cause, doesn't mean the seller necessarily has to agree. If the seller doesn't agree to sign escrow, then unfortunately we have to hold the money. Something I wanted you guys to know. All right, so commitment date, we talked about that. You know, you want to make sure that that the commitment's coming. And so now you got the commitment. What's after the commitment? Clear to close, the words that everybody wants to hear. Do you know when you would need a clear to close to be able to close? How many days before?
3 days.
3. 3 full business days. Yes. So if you're if you're closing on, what's today, Tuesday? If you're closing on Friday and you don't already have a CD like this morning, chances of it closing Friday are not good. It's the TRID laws. Basically, the TRID laws say that the buyer must be disclosed exactly what the closing proceeds are going to be, what they're going to need to bring to closing at least 3 days before the closing, so that they have time to prepare and review and accept it. Then you can't close. So it causes problems. It's less so now. The lenders and the attorneys have done a good job of making this not be as much of an issue as we thought it was going to be last fall, because this changed last fall. And so it's pretty good now. But just know that if 3 to 4 days before the closing, you're not hearing about the CD, you should be asking for it. Like, hey, do we have a clear close, and do we have has the CD been sent to the buyer? Because if the buyer hasn't gotten it, then they can get it electronically now. They can. Yes. So they can get it electronically, but they got to get it.
And they have to sign off on it 3 days before they get the full spec.
Basically, they built in a law, because what was happening is they wanted to take out, the history of it is they wanted to take out all the opportunities for the lender to do last-minute changes that would increase their commission. So all the time, lenders used to be like, oh, the rate just went up a quarter point. You're closing tomorrow.
bring $4,000 and we can buy it down.
Right. So there was some shady business going on, let's put it that way. So it was a good thing for the buyers to do that, but it just makes,
They're supposed to be able to go out and shop it, right?
yes,
Which is about,
yeah, yeah. So after acceptance of the offer, they're supposed to be able to go out and shop. So there's, the two big effects are the closing. They have to get disclosed 3 days before the closing, otherwise they can't close. So that's a protection of the buyer to make sure that that they're accepting what's on the closing disclosure and they're ready to go 3 days from now. That's one thing. The second part that kind of protects the buyer is now if you tell a buyer to go to a lender and get pre-approved, if you don't tell the buyer, you make sure you fill out a full loan application, get a full pre-approval. The lender can't actually ask them to do a full pre-approval because technically the law basically says now the buyer has an opportunity to basically shop around for a mortgage and get after they have a property identified. So lenders now are restricted on what they can ask the buyer to do before they have a property under contract.
So what do I tell the
So
buyer?
you want to tell your buyer, make sure you get a full pre-approval, not a pre-qual. Your lender's not going to really tell you this because they can't by law, but you should get a full pre-approval. So it's something you want to remind your buyers of. The lender can't actually ask them to do that anymore because of this TRID law. But you don't want, if you go in to make offers with a pre-qual versus a pre-approval, you're weak. Your buyer's offer is weak. Because they haven't, all that lender has done is check credit and ask them what their income is. They haven't requested it in the documents. So if the buyer says, I want to do a full pre-approval, what do you need from me? Then they can give them a full pre-approval and you've got a better piece of paper to present with your offers. It's also going to create less headaches down the road. Or you getting a deal under agreement and finding out they can't get pre-approved. Some reasons might be, the biggest reason I would say is, let's say the buyer is self-employed. The buyer thinks, okay, I make this much money. And they tell the lender that, and they check the credit, oh, you're pre-qualified up to $250,000. Now you get a deal under agreement. Now they do the full pre-approval application, and they send them the tax documents and say, well, you know, after you take out your Schedule C expenses, you really only make this much, not this much. And now their pre-approval is, bam, $220,000.
We can't consider your overtime. And you didn't tell us you got child support.
Right, right. So the only way to get a real solid,
I don't really.
you know, pre-approval is to send in your documents, send in your taxes, send in your pay stubs, and do all that. So you do have to do a little coaching with your buyers to say, hey, when you go to talk to the lender, make sure you ask them to do a full pre-approval, not just a pre-qual. And that means submitting taxes and stuff, all that stuff.
Every.
All right, so closing. So checklist here. If you're on the listing side, you got to make sure the seller is getting a final water and sewer reading prior to closing if it's city water.
How far in advance?
I would say
Work on it for a week.
A week.
Some towns, send somebody else to do it. Some will just take the reading over the phone. It all depends on the town.
if the town has to go read it, you want to call in a week. So I'd call in a week. You know, tell your buyer, your seller to call a week before the town.
Actually, I took the responsibility to do that.
Okay, so
Cancel
call-
water and-
Yeah, call the town, find out if they read it or if you read it. If you read it, usually a couple days before closing is fine. You can call it in. They'll give you the amount over the phone. They'll usually send you the final bill that you can forward to the closing attorney.
A week's worth of water and sewer charges isn't gonna be that expensive.
No.
Oil tank is also another one, that's not on there. Someone should read the oil gauge, if you can read it, if not, you have to have the oil company come in, put a dipstick down there and see how full it is.
Right. The other one on here is the smoke and CO inspections. The seller's got to get a smoke detector certification. Call the town, set up an appointment. You want to set, I would say, 2 weeks before closing to get that done, because if you don't, then
If there was
if
a
they,
problem.
yeah, if they come and there's a problem with the smokes, then you're gonna need to have them come back.
Do I pay for that?
No.
Typically, the seller should.
years ago when it was $10 and smoke detectors were only $5.
Let's put it this way, there are a couple agents in the office that are offering that as a perk for their sellers. One of the perks if you listen to me is I'm gonna take care of your smoke detector certification. If it repairs, I'm not gonna, pay the repair, I'm not gonna buy new smoke detectors, but I will at least meet with the inspector, and write the check, whatever it is.
And you have to be familiar with the towns, like if you want an inspection in Worcester, you really ought to go there a month ahead of time to schedule it, because Worcester is just so big and so backed up. The towns, like I'm doing one in Winchton, and I call the guy, he says, yeah, when you close? I said, the end of the month, but I'm gonna be away the last week. He said, well, just the week before that call, we'll get out there right away. Okay.
Yeah. It depends on the town. You wanna ask them what they need to see too in the house. Like,
They're good for 60 days everywhere, yeah.
there's a,
So why wouldn't I take care of that now?
oh, yeah,
They're only good for 60 days, so you don't want to do it too far in advance in case they delay the closing. Then you have to do it again.
you at least wanna make sure your inspection,
Spends up
at least make sure you're through inspections.
that
I mean,
I'm through the inspection.
No, but the buyer's process. The buyer is done with their inspections and they're moving forward.
We've already, they waived the home inspection.
Oh, okay. Then,
And the appraiser just came Monday and gave that.
all right, then I would
thumbs up.
schedule the smoke detector certification. And ask them what their requirements are. Some towns are interpreting the code differently than others. And some adopt their own codes for Texas. So,
Meaning it's not just fire, it's CO2.
Yeah.
every living floor has to have a CO2. They can be plug-in wall, battery backup, or combination. But then there's, I forget what it is, the requirement for within.
CO2 is 7 years and folks is 10 years, but if they're combo units, I guess you pretty much gotta do.
But yeah, but then if they're within a certain number of feet from a bathroom or kitchen, they have to be photo only or
Yeah,
something.
they're not going off every time.
Two other things the fire department will make sure it happens. If there's an oil tank, they want to make sure that the oil line is in a plastic sleeve, so that makes code, and they're responsible to check that at that time. And you actually have to have numbers on the house that they can see from the road. If not, they might just say, yeah, sorry. So bring a black magic marker if it's a white house.
If
White
you're really-
magic marker if it's a dark house.
Yeah, if you're not paying for it and you just want to make it easier on you, also, one of the agents here in the office, Brian Diaz, he does smokes for sellers. You go to the house, figure out what it needs, give the seller a price to replace them and meet the fire department and take care of the whole thing.
At what cost?
And whatever whatever he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, like some houses in Worcester, some multi-families in Worcester could be $1,000. You have to replace all the hallways and everything in the house. It could be expensive. If it's a single-family house, it's usually no more than $300 or $400. But and sometimes the seller just wants to take care of it himself. They do say, hey, call the fire department, find out what you need, take care of it. But all right, so that's the smokes. If it's a condo, you're going to have to make sure that someone's getting 6 feet. So if you're on the listing side, typically you're going to have to help coordinate that. The attorneys, a lot of times, they push it on the agent. Depends on the deal. Sometimes the seller will be taking care of it. But somebody needs to get the 6D cert from the condo association. 6D cert's basically saying this condo is up to date on their payments, and here's a certification saying there's not going to be nothing owed as of the closing date.
Okay.
Occasionally, if you're buying a bank owned, it's going to be what's called a dirty 60, which is basically a 60 that says as long as this is paid at or before closing, it's clean, and it'll be like the amount owed at closing, which will go on the closing disclosure.
Okay.
That'd be paid by the seller. But you want to get that. Sometimes with condos, you're going to have to coordinate getting a condo questionnaire filled out for the mortgage company. Mortgage companies sometimes have questionnaires that they want the condo association to fill out. Like things like how many units are owner occupied versus rented. What do you have for cash reserves?
Do you have any legal
And,
dealings pending?
Are there any abatements?
right, any abatements that are coming up on the unit. So you'll usually find out about that early on because the lender will say, hey, we need this condo questionnaire filled out. So it's usually not your responsibility to go ask, hey, is there going to be a condo questionnaire? They'll just come to you. but sometimes you'll have to coordinate whether you're on either side, getting that done and filled out by the association. All right. So insurance, make sure your buyer is getting insurance binder required for the closing. They're going to need a binder for homeowners insurance.
Yeah, because, you know, we do this all the time, but other people, they're not buying a house every day, and they don't know, you know, that there's a,
A mortgage person ought to be coaching them on that, but it's our job to, we're the quarterback, we're the Tom Brady of the.
Another thing-
We're like the Belichick, I would say.
Yeah.
You know, everybody else has got their jobs, but when everything falls apart, that we're the first ones they're going to look at. And we're supposed to be the ones that are kind of pulling all the pieces together, saying, all right, you're doing your job, you're doing your job, you're doing it. And sometimes it is kind of making sure other people, even though they're professionals, are doing their jobs. Hey, lender, you're doing your job. Hey, attorney, you're doing your job.
So if you help an attorney who slipped up on something, if you help them during a process, because attorneys are human, if they slip up on a process, guess what? Down the road, if you're doing a deal and you had a bad day or a bad week, you slip up, what do you think that attorney's going to do for you? So it's always good to help each other, and those of us that have been around in the business a long time, they say, yeah. When you're dealing with one attorney, you say, oh, shit, I got to make sure we move everything. Other attorneys, you just say, yeah.
Hey, you have a birthday today?
Yes.
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
Facebook just told me.
Oh, Facebook just told you. All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Happy birthday.
she could just tell you look older.
Yeah. She's like, you look a lot older today. All right, so we're almost done. Make sure the buyer is contacting the utility companies to make sure that they're going to have gas and electric on after the day of closing. Good reminder. Good remind your buyer of that. The day before the closing, you typically want to do a walkthrough the day before the closing. The reason being, a lot of times there's going to be stuff that the seller didn't do. It just happens all the time, more than you think. Like, oh, we would thought you would want these 57 paint cans
I actually just.
for the last 5 times we ever painted the house since 1963. Like, no, like, I don't even like your paint now, so it's all
One of
like,
the late kids, for the pretty, they said, well, what kind, are we talking 20 gallons, or are we talking 2 gallons? I said, if you're leaving 2 gallons of the most recent paint, yeah, that's fine.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's just stuff like that, trash barrel, old tools that are worthless. A lot of times sellers act like they're giving it to you out of the kindness of their heart, and the reality is they don't want to find a way to get rid of it. Oh, we left you this great furniture. You know, it could be all kinds of stuff like that. So just make sure. I would do a walkthrough before the day before the closing.
The way that's worded is that sellers will need to be out of the house the day prior to closing. Sometimes sellers are packing up that morning to close on their new house. If I do a walkthrough before, and the sellers are there, I want to make sure that the house was in the same condition. I also want to make sure they took care of any issues they agreed to, and I want to make sure that they're ready to go tomorrow morning. And if anything's weird, I'm coming back in the morning before closing, or coming back right after the papers are signed.
Yeah.
So it all depends on who it is and who I'm dealing with as far as another broker and the buyers. If you're buying a 3-decker and you want it to be broom swept, maybe it ain't gonna be so broom swept. You just work that out.
All right. And there's occasions where there's things that just have to get worked out at the last minute, whether it's, seller giving the buyer $500 for a dumpster fee, stuff like that. You would think that that this would always go smoothly. It doesn't. It doesn't. And for various reasons. There are some times where, as Nadia says, you're going to do 2 or maybe even 3 walkthroughs before you close. But the other reason that even if you do a day before closing, worst case scenario, I think as an agent, you need to drive by the property right before the closing. Do you know why?
You should tree out falling down,
Make sure the house is still there.
doesn't burn.
If you get a walkthrough the day before and go to the closing and go on record and the house burned down overnight, I mean, maybe the insurance would cover it, but you own it. As soon as you sign the deed and it goes on record, you own that house. So let's say the basement filled up with water. All of a sudden there was a lot of rain last night. And it never appeared that the basement got water, and all of a sudden overnight it just decided, today's the day that this house is going to take on water in the basement. And it happened. And if you close, you're SOL. You own that house now. You try to sue and say the seller should have known. There's a lot of things that we could try to do, but once you own a house, you own a house, so.
Ask your buyers what they expect at the final walkthrough. Sometimes lawyers will say, make sure they're gone. If the lawyers say, make sure they're gone, and the buyers are on board with that, then don't do it the night before. Do it the morning of, when they're packing their stuff. So some lawyers say, and I look at walkthrough, I'll do it either way, totally out, or, I mean, you go to look at a house, and the house is Shrewsbury, $600,000, and they've maintained the house, and it's spick and span. Walkthroughs are just a courtesy, because you know those people, they're gonna take care of their house, make sure it's perfect when they leave. If the house was messy when you looked at it in the beginning, it's probably gonna be messy at the walkthrough, even if it's hours before the closing. They're probably still packing up their last boxes of cat food.
Exactly. So, all right. And receiving the keys, when should the buyer receive the keys?
Technically not until after.
Only when it goes on record.
Only when it's on record. We've had huge potential messes. One recently where the buyer was supposedly trusted, give him the keys at the closing and say, you can't go in the house until it's on record. It was late in the day. It didn't make record. It was a Friday afternoon. It did not make record. They closed at 3:45.
They weren't supposed to move in.
They
did.
They moved in, and the seller was basically, seller and listing agent were livid, and basically saying they don't own that house yet. If they don't get out of their house now, we'll call them cops. It was ugly.
So they're just being dicks.
Or give us,
Yeah, kind of.
it cost somebody $1,000 to have to stay there.
Yep.
And thank God that some of the people involved in that transaction were good quality people. They worked it out. But it did cost $1,000.
Why did it cost $1,000?
Because somebody moved into a house they shouldn't have moved into. They had the keys. They never should have had.
Buyers look at it like, I just gave you a check for $50,000 and I signed all my mortgage documents. Why don't I own the house?
Yeah.
Seller looks at it like, you haven't gone on record yet.
It ain't official.
It ain't official.
I'd be like, do you have my check?
You get a call.
And do you know why? Do you know why it would not be
You
official?
can either get a call or you can look it up online. Worcesterbeach.com.
There's a reason it's not official, and they should not. It's not really there until it's on record, because every closing attorney, when they go to record it, that last thing they do
one
is
last title search.
they do one last quick title search to make sure somebody didn't come in and file a lien on the property. Because if you close on Friday and it doesn't go on record until Monday, and all of a sudden Monday morning, bright and early,
The guy who painted your house has a $10,000 mechanic lien on it.
Okay.
Or anyone.
right, and then that lien would stay on the property. If
Yeah,
they file the buyer's deed at that point, it becomes really the buyer's responsibility at that point. So that's why they want to make sure there's no lien, because actually that lien would then be in first position.
Can we find out if the title is clean?
I wouldn't go that far. Let the attorneys do their job. The
When it
attorneys-
goes on record, you can do it, you can handle it a few different ways in handling of the keys. If it's Tony or Tracy, I'm just gonna hand them the key and say, you know not to let that out. So if it's somebody I know, like, and trust, I'm gonna give them the key as an agent, say, don't give it out until it officially goes to record. That's one way, but you gotta be in business a long time to know people that have been around a long time. Or you say, well, when it goes on record, call my office, it'll be on the front desk waiting for you. Or call me, I'll meet you somewhere and deliver it to you. Or leave a combination lockbox on the house. When it goes on record, tell the agent, here's the combination, but the agent go into the push button lockbox to get a key. And you can swing by later on and grab that lockbox.
That's
Or-
what we typically do.
Or it's a $25 lockbox, and you just say, Bill, in a lockbox, by the way, why don't you keep the lockbox? Like, I got a house in Winchington that it's an hour drive back and forth. I have a super electronic lockbox on, which is what I tell everybody. I also have a combination lockbox on the water spigot at the basement. So when this puppy goes to closing, I'm not driving back up to drop off the key. I'm calling the agent and say, Terry, it's been nice working with you. Here's the combination for the lockbox. When it goes on record, by the way, that's my gift to you because it was a pleasure to work.
Exactly.
Done.
All right.
Time and gas money.
That's it. The deal's done.
Good job.
Make sure your closings documents are all in, commission invoice, internal invoice, because we need to know whether you've got any referral fees to anybody, or if there's fees or anything. So the commission invoice, internal invoice, all your other documents. Just to let you know, I know we always ask you to submit your documents before the close, right before the closing. Depending on the busyness of the month, we may not get to reviewing that until the actual check comes in. Because it's always first priority, if checks come in, we process the checks. Secondary is doing all the checks of all the deals that are going to be closing next week.
Okay.
So if it's a really super busy week and they're not getting to reviewing your deal before the actual closing, even though you submitted before the closing, just understand that they're going to review it as soon as they can.
I never submit any, I never hit submit until.
If you have any questions on you're not sure about the process, you're not sure if you've got your documents right,
Do it ahead of time.
do it ahead of time.
I want to do that.
But otherwise, it's not necessary before the closing.
Not necessary.
It's not necessary to submit your files for review prior to closing.
It's a good practice if you're a newbie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
I feel like I know it's
Or
fine.
one again.
Hopefully that was helpful.